in this program tonight for many years. As both a parent and an educator, I always think one of the greatest gifts that I can offer to the families that I work with is the clarity of hindsight. And what I experienced and learned from raising two children who are now 18 and 20 years old. And I think that's one of the reasons that I enjoy Cindy so much, that not only is she working with families in her professional life at the Cape Cod Children's Place, but she has also raised 5 children of her own. So what you will hear tonight is grounded in, I'm sure, a lot of research, but also in the realities of having 5 children in your home and is seeing and experiencing all of it. So thank you again for being here, and I also want to thank Pauline Ferman, who's upstairs right now, for putting this together with us. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It is always a pleasure to come to the island, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. So, okay, we're all good. So, yes, I'm from Cape Cod Children's Place down in Eastham. I began there a long time ago, and I started out as the family support coordinator. Somebody crazy had a moment, and they decided to make me the executive director. I would much rather be the family support coordinator. But anyhow, I am here tonight because this is what I'm passionate about, is really working with families. So I've done a lot of different things over my lifetime and worked with families in all shapes and sizes. But as Emily said, the thing that has taught me the most, has guided me the most, is being a mom to those 5 kids. So there were 5 kids born in 6 years. So today they're 30, 29, 27, 25, and very soon next week to be 24. And so it was a busy time for us, and tonight I can tell you also with confidence they all like me and they have all survived me. That could change next week, but today that's what I can tell you my status is. So I love to talk with parents, and I love parents and caregivers, and I believe that the job of being a parent is the most important job you'll do in your lifetime. So it's interesting that tonight we're going to talk about discipline. So on the boat ride over, you have that TV that you have to be able to read really fast to read the subtitles, so I was doing my best. But what kept coming across, and it's a sports channel, which I really enjoy looking at anyhow, were the 3 basketball players over in China that thought it was okay to steal sunglasses. And I thought, as I kept seeing their headline go across there, I can already tell you how discipline did not happen in their homes, that they would think that that would be okay. So part of my journey of really talking about discipline tonight is it's really one of the key ingredients to your job, and that it's one of the most important parts. And our children, when they're born, are begging you from the very earliest stages to begin to discipline them, and that is to teach them. And so tonight, I know I have to catch the 8:20 bus, wouldn't that be something, huh? So I'll tell you this, that I'm going to keep going until 7:30. At any point, ask questions, but there'll be a few minutes after that to ask additional questions. So I just want to let you all know that before we get going. So as I start to talk up here, these are always important to me, and it really is an important part of talking about discipline is guidelines and rules. And for me, these are always pretty consistent to the work that I do. So that confidentiality, I'm going to share my journey with you. You're going to share pieces of yourself in here. Be safe in that space for each other. You have the right to pass. You don't have to do anything but listen, or you can ask questions and do that. What is a really critical part when it comes to the conversation around discipline is that we not only respect, but we appreciate our differences, because each of us comes from a different place. Doesn't make it right or wrong, it makes it different. Respecting the needs of the group. And so I know one of the challenges here is that you're on this island and I'm on the other one. And sometimes there's an issue or a topic in your family that's really important to you. What I can tell you, and it's happened for all these years that I've been coming here, my contact information is easy to find. Call me or email me, and I'm happy to do whatever I can to support your family, to talk further on that. Respect the needs of your children, and if you do have something to contribute to the conversation, what's really important is that one person speaks at a time. So I've never done a workshop that I haven't learned something, and I think there's a lot to be learned from each other. So to really respect that for one another. So when it comes time to talk about discipline, I always go to my favorite guy, Horgan, and he began talking about discipline by defining it as calling it loving teaching. And Horgan was really one of these, he came over from Israel and he came to this country and he started some really amazing work. And the work around the words positive discipline were some of those first things that he started to use. And when I use the word positive discipline, it's really important that we as a community and as parents and caregivers recognize, because some people think that that means perfect. And the reality is there's no such thing as a healthy, perfect parent. And if your goal is to be a perfect parent, it's actually a form of toxicity, and it will not. So when it's talking about positive discipline, it really means healthy discipline, and that's the place, loving teaching, that I want us to go from, and when we start these conversations. And so there's some really good stuff out there that is carried on from the Horgan stuff, and I'll reference that as we go along. So when you sit here as a parent or a caregiver and say, okay, where am I on discipline up here? One of the very first pieces there is to understand your style of discipline. And so now I have to ask you to do some real self-reflection, because the kind of parent you are here today, the kind of parent that the skill set you use in disciplining your children has a whole lot to do with where you came from. And so when it comes to disciplining your children, there's many of us in this room that have said these words when we were a teenager. I will never say that to my children. I will never do that to my children. And that, just that moment there has a great deal of impact on what's happening here. The other thing that has a great deal of impact is many of us start out, we have a partner, whether it be a spouse or just a partner, or we have a support system. And so when I met my partner, my boyfriend, he's also my husband, you know, I thought he was delightful and I thought he was adorable. And then when we decided to get married, I thought, this is fantastic. And we had our first child, and I said, who the hell are you? Because it was at that point in that relationship that this hit us right square in the front. And we really were both frozen and paralyzed because we didn't make sense to one another. Because our experience of where we came from and the style of discipline that we knew had really impacted us, and we really looked a lot different. And so what I'm going to do here tonight is I'm going to ask you to do some really reflective work here. As I describe these different styles, I want you to sit here and say, this is where I came from, because it's going to have a huge impact on what is happening for you today as a parent or a caregiver. So the very first style up here, and there's actually a fourth that I'm going to give you tonight too, that's really part of the literature today that we really didn't have for a long time, but it's very prominent, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. The first style up here is authoritarian. So I want you to imagine this line that goes across like this. So the authoritarian parent is the my way or the highway parent, the drill sergeant parent, because I said so. Don't ask me why, I said so. That's the authoritarian parent. Now at the other end of the spectrum over here is the permissive parent, and that's the parent that wants their child to call them their best friend. We also nickname that the doormat parent. So that's the parent that whatever makes that child happy, that's what I'm going to do, because I really want them to like me. And so the permissive parent and the authoritarian parent are two extremes. Right in the center is this style of parenting called authoritative parenting. So if we really said to ourselves, I want to be healthy in the way that I discipline, the center place is where we want to be, and that's where children have routines, where they have boundaries, where they have respect within that home that feels good to everybody. So they have this guidance, they're being taught. In the ideal world, we would stay in authoritative parenting. There are some times that we have to become an authoritarian parent. When it's around safety, it's not a discussion, it's because I said so. You cannot run in the road because I said so. When it's safety, so you have to every so often go a little bit that way. Every so often it's okay to be a little bit of a permissive parent. Every so often. So for example, a colleague of mine is a single mom, works really hard all week long. Her children work really hard in school. The rule in their house is we eat dinner at the table every night. But on Fridays, because they've all worked so hard, they call it Friday movie night. And so what they do is they literally set up a blanket in front of the TV and they get pizza, and on Friday nights they sit They break their sort of their ritual or their rule or their routine of sitting at the table, and that's a little bit of letting it loose a little bit. So every so often, it's okay to be there. That fourth style that we start to see a lot, we see it a lot in learning, we see kids that are in this place, is called the unavailable parenting style. And these are parents that we are recognizing as a generation coming up before us that are so connected to technology and truly are unavailable to do what their children need them to do, to meet their children's needs. And so these are children that when we look at behavior, and I'll talk a lot about behavior, these are kids that that's all they've got in their toolbox is behavior, because nothing else is happening for them. And so when we recognize paying attention and asking ourselves, where did I come from here? That's a critical part. If you're saying here tonight, I want to become a parent that teaches my children in a way that they grow in their self-esteem and every part about them. So I can tell you this, that children that come from homes where it's authoritarian discipline or a permissive house, when it comes to learning, these children struggle. Because what doesn't develop in these children is this really critical skill called an inner voice, the capacity to self-regulate. Because in an authoritarian home, somebody's always telling them what to do and how to do it and when to do it. And in a permissive home, nobody's ever using that very filthy, horrible word, no. And so they have no capacity for self-regulation or to know where the boundaries are. So when I reflect on those three basketball players over in China, I'm feeling very confident that one of these two places is where they came from, because they didn't have the capacity to make good choices. They hadn't learned that skill. It hadn't been developed. I also know that when I work with families that are impacted by real challenges like active substance abuse or mental health issues or real challenges like that, or violence, I often see these styles of discipline happening there. Because again, the child that's in a home where active substance abuse is happening, they never know what parent is going to show up. So there's somebody that's screaming, stop, get away from me, or there's somebody that's parenting from a place of guilt. The permissive parent, often the fuel behind that is a place of guilt. And we are guilty parents today, and we should, the world has created a time with economics and all of those things that many of us experience that kind of guilt and apply it to our parenting. What I can also tell you is that it is not unusual for me to hear somebody say, my mother was an authoritarian parent, and my father or my co-parent was a permissive parent. And what happens to children that are raised with those two extremes in the same house, and I hate to use this word when it's defining children, but what they are very, very skilled at is the word manipulation. And it's all about survival. So they know how to do it in order to survive. And so those two extremes have a huge impact on that child. And what it also translates into is crazy making. Now, what I can also tell you is that when one parent is here and another parent is there, you're building a foundation with that authoritative parent. And so over the years when I've done this, one of the exercises that I'm going to ask you to do right now and to pay attention to this is to really, before you even start to think about how do I discipline my children, you really have to ask these questions of yourself. What impacts your style of discipline and at your place of origin? How were you disciplined? How does it impact you as a parent? And what was your partner's discipline strategy? So it's really a question that I ask you to go home and spend some time and talk with your partner about. So when I started doing this, and my husband and I, and he became that, three-eyed monster that I hadn't met, we had to do some real self-reflection. So I'm the oldest of 6 children in my family of origin. And so this is what this looks like. So when I was born, 7 minutes later, my twin brother was born, but I'm still the oldest, and that's how that goes. A year later, my sister was born. In those first early years in our home, the style of discipline was authoritative. And this is how you knew it. We learned to bring our plate to the sink when we were done. When we were done playing with the toy, we put it back before we took out another one. We learned how to put our clothes in the hamper. These were routines and expectations that we were taught and modeled. When I was 4 years old, my parents had another baby. When I was 5.5 years old, my parents had another set of twins. So our house was a rockin' and a rollin'. We didn't fit in the house actually, but we were in it. All of these routines were still going on. So that was a real guided in teaching about routine and boundaries within that home. When my younger twin brothers were about 4 months old, one of my younger twin brothers passed away very suddenly. And so what I can tell you, as a child, I kind of watched the world around me, but what I saw happen was a tremendous shift in our family. And the shift happened because my parents were overwhelmed with grief. They were just overwhelmed. And so my parents shifted from an authoritative parenting style to a completely permissive style. And their grief was never taken care of. So it really turned into like a mental health thing. So that permissive style and what it began to look like in my house was nobody ever told me to put dishes away. The dish was always dirty and it wasn't mine. No one ever asked if I did my homework. Unless the school called, nobody was checking in on those things. And our house physically was trashed because it was nobody's job. I knew every day that I was loved. There was no question that I knew that I was loved, but they stopped teaching. They stopped putting guidance and those things in place. So what does that look like now? So I had a foundation of that authoritative style of discipline. That feels good to me. When you're the oldest, you also get to babysit. So I was the babysitter, and so my younger brothers would actually be in fear because it felt like such chaos in that house that when I was left in charge, I was a screaming Mimi. I was a threatener, I was a general, I was calling everything out. So when chaos feels like that, I absolutely know that I go to authoritarian parenting. I want to control the situation. So I can tell you today as a parent, I have never traveled to permissive land, but have I jumped into the authoritarian land? I absolutely have. And when I start to threaten and I start to say forever and never, I know that my stress levels are up there, and that's my indicator that I've left healthy parenting and now I'm in that place of control, control, control. So for my husband though, when we asked ourselves these questions, because he looked really crazy to me, he came from a house that was strictly authoritarian. So he heard messages like this: if you didn't hear me the first time, I'll get out the belt and you'll hear me the next time. So what he knew as a father and as a man and as a child is he never liked the way that felt. He hated that feeling. But the hardest part for us as a couple was he said, I don't know how to do it any other way. So for the last 30 years,